Thank you to all of our participants for still being with us during this Latinx Mental Health Summit. For us at the National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, it's a pleasure to be able to collaborate with the UTR University at Rio Grande Valley and also with the Imperial Valley College. Our next presentation will be provided by one of our longtime collaborators, Dr. Luis Torres Hostos. Dr. Luis Torres is a founding dean and professor of the School of Social Work at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley in Edinburgh, Texas. He assumed his role on August 1st, 2020, and rapidly integrated into the university's local and binational communities of the Rio Grande Valley, where he is positioning the School of Social Work to play a key role in promoting health equity, and social justice. We will be giving Dr. Torres 1 minute so he can set up his presentation, and we'll begin in just a minute. Thank you for being with us, folks.
Can you hear me? Hello? 1 2 1 2.
Yes, Luis, we can hear you, but we can't see. If you could.
Okay. Yes, I'm trying to show my screen. Click start. No, I think you haven't changed the presenter at your end.
There you go. How about now?
Yes, show my screen. And now, let's see. Screen is paused. I'm not sure what's going on. What do you see at your end?
We see a blue screen.
Okay, let me see if I can then do this.
Yeah, we can see your presentation now.
Fantastic, fantastic. So hello, thank you everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Angel said, I'm Luis Torres. I'm the new.
Excuse me. Do you have your webcam available? We are not able to see you.
Oh, I thought I had turned it on. Hold on. It says people can't see me. I think it might be an issue of the. Hold on, of the presentation.
It is turned on.
Yeah, it is turned on, so I'm not sure.
Okay, so it's on my end. I'm sorry for that.
Okay. Hold on. Let's try this again. Okay, you see the slides?
No, we see the blue screen once again.
Okay. Give me 1 second because I'm doing the same thing I did. Show my screen, okay. Any luck?
No, you did something earlier and it showed real quick.
I know, and I'm, okay. How do let me stop sharing first.
Yeah, I will take over.
Okay. Yep, I stopped it. Let me try it again.
I'm gonna send you my.
Are you planning a trip to Cancun? All right, show my screen. There you go. I got it now. Let me see. Technology. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So, you know, if there's one thing that this past year and a half has taught every single one of us is patience and compassion and flexibility, and particularly with technology. So I'm Luis Torres, and I really enjoyed Inma's presentation. I'm typically the one who's doing all the presentation about all the stats and the mental health, and so it was nice to be sitting at this end and listening to her presentation and learning from her. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, wearing my educational hat as a dean of a new school of social work. I'm going to talk about equity mental health, breaking barriers to access mental health treatment, and increasing community awareness about Latino populations. And so the objectives are understanding barriers to community participation, and particularly because we have a college target audience today, college enrollment and student well-being with a focus on Latino students, discussing strategies for improving barriers to community participation, particularly for immigrant students, and learning best practices in creating welcoming campuses for immigrant students and for Latino students in general. So I want to start to talk a little bit about mental health inequity, right? And in a moment, I'm going to unpack that term inequity, but I want to define it first. So when we talk about mental health inequities, what we're talking about systematic differences in health status between different groups of people. Systematic means they're not random, that these differences exist for a reason. Moreover, these differences in health status have significant social and economic costs for the individual, for their communities, and for society. And as I said a moment ago, they're not random, they're caused by something. And we know that the health inequities that we have in the US and all throughout the world are caused by social factors, what we call social determinants of health: education, employment status, income levels, gender, ethnicity. All of these things have a marked influence on health and health outcomes. And this is all over the world. All countries, whether they're low income, middle income, or high income countries, have wide disparities in health status of different groups of people. And it's always in the same direction. The lower an individual socioeconomic position, the higher their risk of poor health. And this is really a social justice issue beyond just a health and mental health issue. Many of you are familiar with calculators in the US that will tell you what your life expectancy is based on your zip code. Your zip code should not be the deciding factor on how long you're going to live. How much money you have should not be the deciding factor in how good or how bad your health is going to be. So we really have to tackle these issues from a social justice lens. I said I wanted to unpack this term inequity for a moment, and many of you might be more familiar with the term disparity. We talk a lot about Hispanic or Latino health disparities, and disparity is a sanitized term. Over the years, I've actually moved away from the term disparity, and I've started to use more and more the term inequity, because while they are related, they're interdependent, they're very distinct constructs. A disparity simply means there's a difference, there's a lack of parity, right? Many of us grew up with Sesame Street, and you'll remember the song from Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other, right? There's no judgment made there. Not one is not better or worse than the other. They're just different. That's a disparity. And inequity, by definition, implies a state of unfairness. When we talk about health inequities, we're saying that some people have better health and some people have poor health because of a specific characteristic. And as I said a moment ago, from a social justice perspective, we must address inequities and continue to address them. I'm talking about health and mental health interconnected. Dr. Brock Chisholm, who was Director General, actually was the first Director General of the World Health Organization in 2013 and was a psychiatrist, famously said, without mental health, there could be no true physical health, echoing words that had been said almost a decade earlier by then Surgeon General David Satcher in his famous report on mental health, where he talked about health and mental health being intertwined, being together. You cannot have one without the other. Dr. Satcher went further and he talked about what do we need to do to address these mental health inequities, right? And he talked about stigma, talked about acknowledging that stigma exists and finding ways to overcome it. He talked about building awareness about mental health and effective treatments. One of the reasons why people don't seek treatment for mental health, there's many reasons. Inma spoke about some. We're going to look at others today as well in my presentation. But one of the reasons is they just don't know where these services are. When they exist, they're not necessarily advertised. We don't know how effective they are. Very few people with diagnosed or diagnosable mental health conditions could be helped by existing treatments. So it's a tragedy that we don't actually seek treatment. Dr. Satcher talked about addressing the shortage of mental health providers and the lack of training for people in the community who could potentially impact a person's health. We have seen over the last 20, 25 years a tremendous emphasis placed on community health workers, or promotores y promotoras de salud, because these are folks that are from the communities, in the communities. They speak the language of the community, they understand the community, and most importantly, they have the trust of the communities where they live and work. And these folks can be very effective bridges between people in our communities and other providers of healthcare. Dr. Satcher talked about ensuring the delivery of state-of-the-art treatment. And our national institutes of health and other funding entities at the federal, state, and local government levels and private levels have invested tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in developing evidence-based interventions for the general population and specifically for different groups of people, because Dr. Satcher talked about tailoring treatment to age, gender, race, and culture. We cannot take an approach of what we call a cookie cutter approach, one size fits all, right? Different groups of people are helped by different approaches, and we've invested a lot of resources and money in developing evidence-based interventions. We're lagging in developing evidence-based interventions for Latinos and other minority groups, but we're in a better position than we were 30 years ago. Dr. Satcher talked about facilitating entry into treatment. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which funds the National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and is one of the federal agencies sponsoring this webinar today, has a philosophy called no wrong door into treatment. It doesn't matter if you go first to your primary care provider, or if you go first to a mental health provider, or if you go first to a substance use provider, we should be delivering comprehensive treatment. And of course, the financial barriers. Many of you said insurance, lack of insurance or underinsurance is one of the barriers. So sadly, here we are, this was 1999, over 2 decades later, and we are still battling many of these same issues. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation tells us that health equity means everyone. Everyone. It doesn't matter what color you are, how tall, how skinny, how fat, where you come from, what your last name is, what language you speak. Everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be as healthy as possible. That's equity. This, of course, requires tackling these social determinants of health that we've been talking about: the poverty, discrimination, housing instability, food insecurity, safe and secure communities, access to jobs where you have humane, decent working conditions and fair pay, quality education. All of these factors we have to tackle working with our communities in order to achieve health equity. Is this an achievable goal? I believe so. I think it's absolutely achievable. It takes all of us. It's going to take all of us to get there. Access is important, but not sufficient. So we talk about health insurance, about being an important factor, and it is a very important factor, but it's not sufficient. We have to address all of these social determinants of health that I've mentioned already, and many other things that I'm going to talk about shortly. Many of you have seen these diagrams that try to show the distinction between equality and equity. If we were using a different platform, we could have a little bit of audience participation and people yelling out what they think. But you see the principle is the same in all three. The one in the baseball game, in the equality side of the picture, all three are on the same size box, but there's still one person who can't see. And in the equity side, those boxes have been redistributed so that everybody can actually see the game. The same thing in the middle, with the one that's trying to reach the fruit. In the one on the left, all are on the same size ledge, and there's still people who can't reach. 2 of the 3 can't reach. On the right-hand side, you've distributed those ledges by the size of the person and everybody can reach. And the third one about people with different abilities, you see in the top one, everybody has the same a bicycle, and you have a little kid over there on the right hand side who's really struggling to reach the pedals. You have the second figure, which is incredibly tall, and they're really struggling to propel that bicycle. And then you have somebody who's in a wheelchair and they can't get on the bicycle at all. And on the bottom side, you see the little person has a smaller bike, the taller person has a bigger bike, and then there is a wheelchair enabled bicycle as well, right? So that's equality and equity. There's one more diagram that I like to use, which is this one. And this is what we talk about when we're trying to get at the root cause. We don't want to just put a band-aid on the issue. We want to solve the issue. And here you have, this is a variation of the baseball game. You've seen the two on the left, and the extreme left one, your left, the boxes are all the equal size, and there's still one of the kids who can't see the game. The middle one, which we saw a moment ago, the boxes have been redistributed, so all three of them can see the game. In the third image, the boxes are no longer necessary because there is a transparent fence there that protects them from being hit with a foul ball or with a ball hit straight at them, but they're still able to see the game, right? So that's the issue, eliminating the systemic barriers, not just dusting over the problem, but fixing the problem. Let's move on to talk about Hispanics and Latinos. And before I go on, I want to pause for a moment and a comment on usage of terms. I use Hispanic, Latinos interchangeably. Every now and then I throw in the Latinx term, which is the newer term, to to make people happy, people who oops, what happened? My screen changed. Give me 1 second. I've moved this over here. Good. To make people who are woke, I hope woke is still a term that we're using today. You know, I'm an old guy, so sometimes I use terms a little bit behind the times. I remember I have a 16-year-old daughter, and about 4 years ago, she was 12 at the time, we were having a conversation in the car, and I was trying to be cool because, you know, I had a teenage daughter at that point, and now I have almost a young adult. And I said to my daughter something like, "Hey, Gabrielle, that is so fat," you know, PHAT. And she just gave me this look and she said, "Dad, that is so 5 minutes ago," you know. So I hope woke is still a term that we're using. But you know, so Latinx is an interesting term. And when I first heard it, I started to use it, and then I started to get a little bit of pushback from some of my older colleagues. And I said, well, let me research it a little bit. That's what you do when you're in the academy. You go and do a little bit of research to see, you know, what's the usage, who's using it, where it comes from. And we know the origins of it. You know, it's meant to be non-binary and more inclusive. However, the Pew Research Center released a report of a survey they had conducted on the use of the term Latinx back in August 2020, and the results were remarkable. They found that 76% of Latino adults, 76%, just over 3/4, have never heard the term Latinx. Forget about don't use it, they've never heard the term. Only 3% of Latino adults actually use the term, as per the Pew Research Center. And who's using it? Folks like yourselves. So young adults, 18 to 29, college grads are more likely to have heard the term and to use the term. So from a health provider perspective, you know, you always ask your client how they prefer to be addressed. So whether you assign the term to yourself is okay. Don't necessarily assign these terms to other people without checking in with them. You know, most individuals who are Hispanic or Latino may use Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, Chicano, Raza. The majority of folks actually identify by national origin. Most people will say I'm Mexican or Mexican American or Puerto Rican or Salvadoran. But ask the question. So moving on back to the issue of mental health inequities, I'm going to go through some facts about mental health inequities, and then I'm going to contextualize some of them. So the first two you see that have some little stars there. I'm going to come back to them in a minute. So we know that Latinos, Hispanics are at lower risk for most psychiatric disorders compared to non-Hispanic whites. There's a lot of protective factors in our communities. However, US-born Hispanics report higher rates of most psychiatric disorders than Hispanic immigrants. This is something that we've known for several decades, and it's something that's called the Hispanic healthy immigrant paradox, that no matter how you measure acculturation, whether you look at it in terms of nativity, US-born individuals versus foreign-born individuals, where you look at it at number of years spent in the US, whether you look at it at as language proficiency, primarily English speaker versus primarily Spanish speaker, for example. No matter how you look at it, the more time somebody has spent in the US, the more likely they are to begin to experiencing health and mental health issues. So what's happening is that the protective factors that we have in our communities and in our families begin to erode, and the risk factors for health and mental health conditions start to creep into our lives, right? We'll talk more about those factors later. And I said I'll come back to bullet number 1 and number 2 in a moment because I want to contextualize it. We also know that older Hispanic adults and Hispanic youth are especially vulnerable to psychological stress associated with immigration and acculturation, what we call acculturative stress. Older adults that are here, many of them have, even if they've been here for a long time, they've remained living in what we call ethnic enclaves, where they speak Spanish, everybody speaks Spanish, they have no need to learn English, they do almost everything they need to do in that ethnic enclave. And then when they interact with the outside world, they experience a lot of distress. And then youth are acculturating much more rapidly because they're in school, and it's almost like they're living between two worlds. It's one world when they go to school, and it's another world when they go back home. And that creates a lot of distress as well. And finally, in terms of where Latinos get their health care, only 1 in 10 Hispanics with a mental health disorder will go and get services from a general healthcare provider. The majority go to their primary care physician, and they complain about somatic complaints. It's my headache, it's my body aches, it's everything aches, it's this, it's that, it's the fatigue. They don't talk about it in terms of mental disorders. And only 1 in 20 have gone to receive services from a mental health specialist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a social worker, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, etc. I want to go back to the first 2 bullets because I said I wanted to contextualize it. We've known for decades that Hispanic Latinos are at lower risk of most psychiatric disorders. I think we have to relook, take a fresh look at these statistics, especially after the last year and a half. COVID has disproportionately impacted Latino communities, Latino and African American communities. The Latino communities have had higher mortality and higher morbidity from COVID. Morbidity means sickness, right? So if you're Latino, you were more likely less likely to get testing to begin with because it wasn't available in our communities, more likely to actually test positive for COVID because you were more likely to be in jobs where you had to keep going to work if you wanted to feed your family, right? More likely to get sick from COVID, more likely to be hospitalized, to be sicker, and to die, right? So COVID has caused an enormous weight of distress in our communities that often translates into anxiety, depression, and other psychiatric conditions. As of today, about 600,000 people have died in the US alone from COVID. 1 in every 6 are Hispanic. Over 100,000 people of the folks who have died have been Hispanic or Latino. So we have to go into our communities and understand what the impact of COVID has been in terms of the mental health of people in our communities. And I think we're going to find, not surprisingly, that these numbers are going to change. The second bullet, is this Hispanic immigrant paradox or healthy immigrant paradox, which we've known about for several decades and we've studied it. I think we have to take a fresh look at this because this was an issue that existed when people coming, immigrants coming, particularly from Latin America, were more economic immigrants, people who were looking for better economic conditions to support themselves and the families that they were leaving behind. Over the last 10, 15 years, that has changed dramatically. And the folks who are coming from Latin America, whether legally or with undocumented status, are coming to escape horrible conditions, safety conditions, oppression back home, and have experienced horrible experiences in their journey to get here, right? So this notion that they're going to be as healthy when they get here, you know, as they may have been when they were back home, or remain healthy, is something that we have to revisit. The immigrants that are coming today from Latin America are more like immigrants and refugees from war-torn countries than they are like the economic immigrants that we were welcoming 20 years ago. So we really have to go back and study these things in more depth. Let me go back to my next slide. Continuing with this issue of health inequities, Latinos are more likely to report poor communication with their health provider. And this isn't just about, you know, I speak Spanish and my provider doesn't, right? It's poor communication is also about, I don't feel heard. I don't feel understood. My provider doesn't ask me questions. My provider doesn't involve me in the treatment plan. And this is even truer when you go to this next bullet. Bilingual patients are evaluated differently when they're interviewed in English as opposed to Spanish. So many providers, when they've interviewed a client in English, they assume that the person is smarter, more educated, can better understand clinical terminology. They'll discuss different treatment options with the person, etc. When they're interviewing somebody who's in Spanish, they have this assumption the person might be less intelligent or will understand less. So why bother to explain? I'm just going to tell them what they're going to do, right? And many times these are implicit biases, right? The provider isn't saying to him or herself, oh, this person doesn't speak English, so they're probably not as smart. I'm not going to bother to explain to them like I would to an English-speaking client. These are implicit biases that creep into our work. Latinos are also more frequently undertreated. Only 1 in 4 Hispanics with a mental health condition received treatment in the past year. Now, in truth, for mental health, most people that need mental health services don't go. The number for non-Hispanic whites is 2 out of 4, right? So they're not doing that much better, but Latinos are more frequently undertreated. Inma talked about insurance. The latest figure is actually 18.7%. So Latinos have had and continue to have the highest uninsured rates of any racial or ethnic group within the United States, 18.7% versus 6.3% uninsured for their non-Hispanic white. And who leads the charge in the number of uninsured Latinos in the United States? Yours truly, the state of Texas. And the government still will not do Medicaid expansion. Barriers to accessing mental health. So Inma talked a little bit about this, so I'm gonna go fast through these slides. Talked about insurance, so being uninsured or being underinsured. Sometimes you have insurance, but the insurance that you have has very high copays, very high deductibles, very high cost for prescriptions. So you're not going to go and get treatment. What's the sense of going if you can't afford to pay the deductibles, the copays, or the cost of prescriptions, right? So underinsurance is also an issue. Poverty is a huge problem, a huge barrier. You know, not because poor people don't like to go to mental health, it's because poor people are dealing with a bunch of other things. You're in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, the last thing you may want to think about is, I may need some counseling. I may need to see a psychiatrist. 15.7% of Hispanics. This was 2019. So again, we have to look at the impact of COVID on this. So 15% of Hispanics live at or below the poverty line in the United States, right? That is a historic high. In 2019, we hit a historic high. If we look at post-COVID, it's probably even higher than that. By the way, the comparison numbers is 10.5% for all folks in the US and 7.3% for non-Hispanic whites. And this is census data. Another barrier is lack of knowledge or awareness about mental health and services available. I touched on this one earlier. Even if you have insurance, if you don't know where you go, you don't get services. Stigma is a big one, and Inma talked a lot about stigma. So I'm not gonna belabor the point with stigma, only to remind people what stigma is. You know, stigma is a mark that somehow you are different, right? So there are all of these myths about what it means to have a mental health condition, mental illness, even mental illness. You know, when we're talking about in Spanish, you know, the term is desórdenes, right? Desórdenes psiquiátricos. You tell somebody that they have un desorden psiquiátrico, they're going to run for the door. You're never going to see them again, right? So even the way we talk about it can perpetuate stigma. Language is a big barrier here. And of course, English, Spanish is an obvious one. You know, if the patient is a limited English proficient and the provider is limited Spanish proficient, and we're in places where they don't have interpreters or translators, we're going to have problems. But many folks coming from Latin America also speak indigenous languages. So Spanish is a second language for them. You know, many clients that I've had I've lived in New York City for 19 years. I lived in St. Louis for 2 years. I lived in Houston for 19 years before I came down here to the Rio Grande Valley. And I have had patients who spoke Quechua or Nahua. And thankfully, they also were fluent enough in Spanish for us to be able to communicate. And I was saying a moment ago when I was talking about stigma, the language of mental health, the way we talk about mental health and mental health treatment. You know, many Latinos in our community are not used to that language, and they have trouble speaking that language of counseling, right? You know, we'll go to our religious leader, the priest at the Catholic Church or the pastor at the evangelical church, and we'll unload and we'll tell them everything. But don't tell me to go to a counselor or to a psychologist or to a psychiatrist. The video that Inma shared with us was absolutely priceless. I actually copied the title so I can find it later on YouTube. Other barriers to mental health care, lack of access to culturally tailored services. So Dr. Sachter was talking in 1999 about how, you know, one size does not fit all, and we have to develop culturally tailored services, and we're still trying to develop culturally tailored services. There have been some advantages, but we're lagging way behind. You know, the next two bullets are very important to this type of webinar. Lack of culturally competent and culturally grounded mental health professionals, and the shortage of bilingual or linguistically trained mental health professionals. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to make an assumption that because of where you're located, you know, I know Imperial Valley, I've had the opportunity to visit El Centro, and I think Calexico is on the US side and Mexicali is on the Mexico side. And, you know, I did some work there a couple of years ago through a federal grant. And like us, the majority of the population was Hispanic. In the Rio Grande Valley, 94% of the population is Hispanic or Latino, mostly of Mexican American origin. That's not the case across the country, right? There are communities in the country, even though we're large and growing and we're everywhere, there are communities in the country that are not majority Hispanic and where there are very few providers who are Hispanic. So the Latino population is going to continue to grow, and we are going to continue to grow much faster than the provider pool of Latinos will grow. So we have to make every effort to also train non-Latinos on all of these issues that we're talking about. So I hope that many of you decide to go into health and mental health and become, you know, excellent Latino providers of health and mental health. But the majority of the providers in the next 20, 30, 40 years are not going to be Hispanic. They're not going to be Latino. So we have to continue to prepare them to understand our communities and to work with our communities efficiently. Difficulty recognizing signs of mental illness is another one. So oftentimes in our communities, we will attribute something that's going on to something else, right? You know, depending on your religious beliefs, you may believe that you know your child, your brother, or your sister has some type of possession, or that something else is going on, right? It's hard when you don't speak the language and when you don't know the constructs to say, I think my son or my daughter is struggling from a mental health condition. Let me take them for care, for help. Problems identifying psychiatric symptoms when the chief complaint is somatic. I touched on this earlier. I was saying that Latinos tend to talk about somatic or bodily complaints. My stomach hurts, I feel this pressure in my chest. It's probably anxiety, right? But they don't talk about anxiety or nervousness, right? When you start to open it up, if you ask the right question, you say, oh, usted sufre de ansiedad, suffer from anxiety, you're going to get a blank stare. But if you say to somebody, a veces tiene problemas de los nervios, they might say, oh, yes, sometimes my nerves are a little frazzled, right? And you open up the door and you start conversing. Legal status is another one. Even Inma was talking about how in Washington, D.C., and many other very progressive places throughout the United States, you can access services regardless of your legal status. There are other places where that is not the case, where if you can't show proof that you're a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, you can't access any services. And of course, as I said, acculturation. Acculturation can be a barrier to accessing mental health services. Let's shift gears now and let's talk about education, because I'm talking to primarily an audience at Imperial Valley, and I did a little bit of research on your programs and your communities, and there's lots and lots of similarities between you and us, and where you are and where we are. So education. So as of 2019, census 2019, 70.5, 71% of Hispanics adults had a high school diploma or higher. These are Hispanic adults 25 and older. About 71% of them had a high school diploma or higher. The corresponding rate for non-Hispanic whites is 93.3%. So that's an inequity. That's not just a disparity. There are reasons why there are more non-Hispanic whites who are college graduates than there are Latinos or Hispanics, right? It's not just one of these things is not like the other. There is an inequity, right? There is an unfairness here. And I'm going to tell you in a moment why that's the case. When you look at bachelor's degrees, we know we're living in a society where a high school diploma, as important as it is going to get you very, very little. I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about a law firm in Manhattan that was looking for filing clerks, people to file, and they were requiring a university degree, a college degree. 17.6% of Hispanics 25 and older have a bachelor's degree, compared to almost 37%, right? More than twice the rate for non-Hispanic whites. Again, that is not just a disparity, that is an inequity. And when you look at graduate levels, master's, doctorates, professional degrees, 5%, 5.6% of Hispanics have a graduate or advanced professional degree versus 14%, right? 14.3, almost 3 times the rate of non-Hispanic whites. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is not just a disparity, it's an inequity. This is about enrollment. This is from the National Center for Education Statistics. Just wanted to share with you that the story is changing. We are changing the trajectory and the narrative of this story. More and more Hispanics and Latinos are enrolling in college than ever before, which is wonderful. When you look at this graphic, 2000, 2010, and 2018, those are the 3 bars. You see that, in 2000, 22% of 18 to 24-year-old Hispanics were enrolled in college. In 2010, that had jumped to 32%, and by 2018, it had jumped to 36%, right? So we are making tremendous progress. In 2000, we were second to last, behind American Indian and Alaska Natives, and we've made great progress. The literature always compares us to non-Hispanic whites, and I always joke that I don't want to be like the non-Hispanic whites. I want to be like the Asians. The Asians make more money than anybody else. They have higher education levels than everybody else. So let's change the reference group, and let's say we don't want to be like not Hispanic whites anymore. I want to be like my Asian colleagues, like my Asian counterparts. Now, like in every group, you have to unpack it. There are Asian subgroups that live in tremendous poverty and have very low educational achievement. But as a group, they're doing much better in our society than other groups. This one looks by sex and ethnicity, right? So you have males on the left and females on the right, and then in each of them, the fourth set of bars is Hispanics. So, 18 to 24-year-olds by sex and ethnicity, 18% male, 25% female. So Latino guys, just go out there. I know most of you or all of you are already in college, but go and talk to your brothers and talk to your friends, male friends. And, we got to get better. We got to get up there with our with our hermanas, with our sisters. And then in 2018, 32%, so a great increase for Hispanic males, and another great increase from 25 to 40% for Hispanic females. So Hispanic females are enrolling in college at higher rates than Hispanic males, and at higher rates than in earlier decades. So tremendous progress, but we have to be wary, right? That this progress comes at a cost, and the story hasn't been finished, right? It's not enough for us to enroll in huge numbers in colleges, community colleges, and universities. We got to make sure that we graduate and make it to the next level. Education is the ticket to improving our personal lives, our familial lives, and our communities. And we know still that if you're Latino, you're more likely to attend college part-time. You're more likely to start at a community college, you're more likely to live at home, and you're more likely to work while you're in school. Let me stop there and talk about those first four. Part-time, community college, living at home, and working while in school. There is a ton of literature that says that if you go, regardless of who you are, if you go to a 4-year college, if you attend full-time, if you live on campus, with this whole philosophy of living, learning communities. And if you don't work, if you devote your time exclusively to your studies, and if you do work is at school, maybe as a research assistant or in some capacity that doesn't take you away from the university community, you graduate faster and at higher rates, right? So already in those four first bullets, we're at a disadvantage. In addition to that, Latinos are more likely to come from low-income families. So about 70% of Latino undergraduates in higher education come from families that are in the bottom half of earners. 70%, 7 of every 10 Latino undergraduates come from families that are in the bottom 50% of earners in the United States, right? You know what the number is for white students? The reverse, the flip side. 2 in 3 white students, 66%, come from the top half of earners. From the top half of earners, right? You don't got to work. You don't have to go part-time. You can go to a selective college if you want to, right? So those are the things that account for the inequity. That's why I kept saying those differences are not just differences. They're inequities. Latinos are more likely to qualify for federal financial aid, which means that you're poor. Just under half of Latinos undergraduate Latinos in college are eligible for Pell Grants, which is money given to those with a high financial need. What is the contrast? 1 in 5 white students, 1 in 3 white students qualified for Pell Grant, right? Almost 50% of Latinos, 1 in 3, 33% white students, right? There's the inequity. And then Latinos are more likely to be first generation in college, right? Just 1 in 5 students, 20% of white students was first generation in college. The number for Latinos is much, much higher, in the 70%. So again, pay out of pocket. You're more likely to have to pay out of pocket because many Latino students don't qualify for federal financial aid, right? Or they run out of federal financial aid because they're taking longer to graduate. They're more likely to pay out of pocket. They're more likely to take out student loans. They're more likely to be first generation in college. As a result, we look at 4-year graduation rates and 6-year graduation rates. They take longer to graduate. So 6 years later, Latino students are more likely to still be in college, right? Now, the good news is they're still there. They're persistent. They don't give up. You know, the bad news is that after that point, we just start to drop off. Life takes priority, right? So we have to do better. And how do we do better? We do better through community engagement. And here's where I get to brag a little bit about my new institution, University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, on the U.S.-Mexico border, on the other side of the country from where you are. We're in Texas, and we're doing an extraordinary work here because we're working with the community, not for the community, not on behalf of the community. We're working with the community. So we're looking here at enrollment. So this is overall enrollment at UTRGV for last fall 2020, and at a time where most four-year colleges and universities in the country were losing students, we actually increased. We have over 32,000 students, and this was repeated in spring 2021. This is just different ways of looking at the same thing. So I want to go to the slide that has Hispanic or Latino origin. So just like you, we're on the border. I think you guys are 20-25 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border, which is exactly the case for us. We actually might be a little closer than that. And we have, if you're keeping track, on the female side, 17,746 of our students are female and are Hispanic females, and 11,624 of our students are Hispanic males. So that's 29,370 out of 32,441. 91% of our student body is Hispanic and Latino. And a very high percentage of those are first generation in college. Now, so how are we doing it? I want to advance to community engagement. You know, we're doing this through engaging with our community. And what does it mean to engage with the community? The CDC defines community engagement as working collaboratively with and through the people that we wish to have an impact, not for the people, with them and through them, meaning they have agency, right? A community engagement can be a powerful vehicle for bringing about behavioral changes. I mean, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get Latinos to have, in Spanish we say un plan de vida, to see that there is a future and that education can be part of that future. And education, I don't mean just college and university. Not everybody has to go to college or university, but you have to then do something, get a trade, get a profession that's going to make you successful in your community. It involves partnerships and coalitions, and we're building partnerships and coalitions with school districts across the valley. We have a lot of pipeline programs. We actually go and present at universities, at high schools and middle schools. We have a program called Gear Up. It just happened a couple of weeks ago, where all of our different health professions present to middle schoolers and high schoolers about careers and what it takes to get here. Guiding principles of effective community engagement, we work to increase knowledge of the community and the issues seeking to address. In this case, what we wanted was more enrollment of Latinos. We have, the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley is a new university. We're 5.5, 6 years old, created by the union of two legacy institutions, University of Texas Pan American and University of Texas Brownsville. And so we had to do a lot of work to bring these communities together. Encourage the co-creation of additional knowledge. In other words, listening to our communities and doing what the communities want to do, not this top-down approach. We are the experts and we're going to tell you what to do. Creating future opportunities for individuals to stay engaged with each other. So when we're gone from these communities, this process is still going on. And ensuring that there are opportunities and effective communications to become regular, ongoing components. So how have we done this, right? This is my last couple of slides. These are some of the things that we're doing, and I'm sure you are doing many of these things, and other universities that are very successful at attracting and keeping and graduating. I want to keep making that point. It's not just enrolling them. It's making sure we get them to the finish line. So we got to increase awareness of Latino students' college experience. You know, when being the first in your family to go to college, and I was the first in my family to go to college, you know, is it's an interesting experience, right? You sometimes feel like a fish out of water. You can't go home and ask your family about how to handle X, Y, or Z because they've not been through that experience, right? They can be supportive, they can listen to you, but they're not going to be able to provide you with solutions, right? So where do you seek those solutions? Sometimes we don't want to ask questions. We don't want to feel stupid. We don't want to feel like we have special needs, you know, that the other students may not have, right? So the university, the program, the college has to take the initiative and create the programs and welcome you into them. We have to roll out the welcome mat, starting at the top. This is a quote by John Motor, who's Senior VP and Chief Operating Officer of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And Dr. Motor says, the more presidents, deans, and provosts keep the message in front of students, family, faculty, and staff, and the message is that their institution is welcoming to all kinds of people, including Latinos. I would even say especially Latinos and many of our communities, and that we want to help everyone attain academic and career success, the more we will be supporting our Latino students. Now, that's not enough. We got to do more. We have to increase representation. We have to hire more Latino faculty and staff. You know, I remember when I went to college in Puerto Rico, but when I moved to the United States for graduate school, there wasn't a single Latino faculty in the program where I was doing my master's and PhD in clinical psych. Not a single Latino faculty. There was one part-time faculty who taught every other year a class called clinical services with ethnic minorities, Dr. Luis Sayas, and I latched onto him and I've never let go. 31 years later, he's still one of my closest friends and mentors, and he's now the dean at UT Austin in the School of Social Work there, right? We gotta be able to see people who look like us, who speak like us, who feel like us, who've lived like us, who understand our communities, because those are the folks that we're gonna go to when we're struggling to see what can I do here. Identifying and supporting key faculty and staff who know the Latino community or who come from the community and who are able to connect to students. Not everybody who comes from our communities is able to connect with us. There are people that, you know, that they think they're better than everybody and they're full of themselves, and they take an approach that, you know, they lifted themselves up by the bootstraps, so why can't you? You know, when I meet them, I tell them that, you know, it's a bunch of bull crap because nobody does anything on their own. They had people that helped them too, right? But we don't want those. Those are not the ones that we want interacting with our students. We want people who are able to connect with our students. Financial assistance is a big issue, and we need to, and we do here, we offer financial assistance beyond just traditional student aid. You know, emergency short-term loan funds that can help a student fix your car, or go to the doctor and get your teeth filled, for example, or pay your rent. You know, you had a situation and you had to fix your car and now you don't have enough money to pay your rent. We have a food pantry here in our campus for students that are experiencing food insecurity. You know, sometimes we're just talking about a couple $100, $100, $200, $300 for an emergency situation that can make the difference between staying in college and dropping out of college. So we got to pay attention to that. We engage with our students, engaging with the student social networks, with their families, helping them understand the difference between high school and college. It's very, very different. Many of us, and I'm sure that I'm like many of you, you know, I'm smart enough that my study habits in high school sucked. They were terrible. You know, I would cram the night before and I was still able to get an A or an A minus on the exam. The first semester in college kicked my butt. You know, it was a rude awakening when I got that first D in an exam, something that had never happened to me. And I said, oh, wait a minute, I can't do the same thing I was doing in high school. You know, I had to hit those books and develop study habits and do it quickly. Summer bridge programs. College is a new experience, right? So if we develop summer bridge programs, particularly for first in college students, and resources for that first year to help them ease the transition. Sometimes, we went to high schools where they didn't really teach us um, uh, good reading or writing skills, composition skills. So I might have to brief up on how I write or on how I speak. Those first year resources can make the difference between success and drop off. Offering and normalizing asking for help, right? Don't wait for those. We tell our students, oh, we have a counseling center. Well, that's not enough. Do peer groups. Don't call them support groups. Don't call them mental health groups, but call them peer groups, and have students share with each other their experiences, especially early on as they're adjusting to life on a campus. Offering incentives. This is for faculty. If there's any faculty listening, something that I've always done, no matter whether I'm teaching psychology students, social work students, psychiatry residents, doesn't matter who I'm teaching, I've always offered additional credit for going and exploring the counseling center. Students typically have a number of visits that are part of your fees. And I cannot tell you over 30 years that I've been doing this, how many students have come back to me and have said, I went just because I wanted that extra credit in your class, but I have found it so incredibly helpful. Developing pipelines, I was talking about the GERA program that we're a part of, and starting in the very early grades and making college part of the vocabulary, part of the norm, changing the question. When I was in elementary school and middle school, the question for me was, will I go to college? Can I afford college? Will college be worth it? I have a 16-year-old daughter, and from the time that she was old enough to speak, in her vocabulary has been, which college am I going to? Changing that story. Working with families to see the future. I don't have time to talk about it today, but I was part of we developed a program in Houston called the Path to College and Career with the Pasadena Independent School District, which was all about parent and teacher engagement. So we did a lot of training with teachers on family engagement, and then we did a lot of work with parents through something called charlas, brief conversations about seeing the future. What do you want? What are your hopes for your children? And how do you get there? Making a plan to get there. And then developing and strengthening peer-to-peer programs. We have one right now as we get ready to break for the summer and prepare for the fall. In the fall, we're coming back in full swing in pre-COVID conditions, full class sizes, everything in person. And naturally, there's a lot of anxiety in the community about this. So we are facilitating, we're calling them student conversations with student employees, with every incoming freshman, about what it's going to take to create a safe environment for all of us, so that people can talk about their concerns, their anxieties, and know that they are supported. In conclusion, yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can welcome our Latino brothers and sisters to the college campus. We can do it in numbers that have never been seen before, and we can help them get to the finish line. So you can be a part of this, and I know that you already are. So I'm going to stop there. That's my email address in case if anybody wants a copy of my slides. I'm happy to share them. Or if you're considering graduate school, we have a bachelor's in social work and we have a master's in social work, both traditional face-to-face and online. So, look me up, University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley School of Social Work, and we'll hook you up. And there's the code for the evaluation. Angel, back to you. I think you're muted.
Yes, I am, and I've been talking for quite a while. Thank you, Luis. I wanted to thank you for an excellent presentation. Now we have some time reserved for questions. So we encourage our participants to send out their questions through the questions section in our chat, and we'll be more than happy to have both Ima and Luis answer to those questions. I have a question here from one of the participants. How does community engagement address the previously stated inequities? Luis, I believe that one's for you.
Mhm. You know, we have to connect with our communities. We have to engage with our communities to help them understand, first of all, that what they're experiencing is an inequity. You know, when I was growing up in the western part of Puerto Rico, I did not know that we were poor. Everybody around me was the same. You know, I didn't know what poverty is. I didn't know that we were without, you know, we had food on the table every single night, even if it was a little bit of a white rice and some fried eggs, you know, which to this day is comfort food for me. You know, I didn't know that there was a huge number of my friends who were with me going through middle school and high school who were not going to make it to college, right? You know, that struggle that I eventually resolved in the direction of, yes, I'm going to go to college. There were only a handful of people in my high school that actually followed with me in that footstep. So the piece about community engagement is, first of all, to help our communities recognize that these inequities exist. That's step number one. We gotta stop taking these things for granted. That's why I made a big deal about the distinction between a disparity and an inequity, especially when I was talking about the gap, the educational attainment gap. We have to call a spade a spade. In Spanish, we say tenemos que dejar de dorar la píldora, right? We're also gilding the lily is the English equivalent of the expression. Call a spade, and inequity is an inequity, and inequity is unfair, and inequity is an affront to social justice. And then we work with our communities to help them express their voices, you know, to help them advocate for ways to address those inequities, to develop homegrown solutions with our help. I mean, we may be experts in our fields and behavior change and policy and advocacy and mental health and whatever. Our communities are the experts on themselves. They know what's best. And if we engage with our communities, we can work together to close these gaps, to address these inequities, and to achieve social, economic, political, and racial justice for all our communities.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you. And I will say that white rice and eggs is still a comfort food to me too.
Yes.
We have another question here. It's a lengthy one, but it's a good one. It starts, can't deny that it is extremely important to support other English-speaking colleagues in understanding our culture. But I have to be honest and mention that it does get tiring to keep explaining my culture and why we are collective and family oriented. What recommendations, suggestions would you offer to open up the conversation with other mental health leaders who might not understand the Latino Hispanic community needs?
You know that I'll say something, then I'll turn it over to Ima, because you know I know that Ima has some views on this. But yes, it is tiring. I met many of my African American colleagues have always shared with me, and especially over the last year and a half, how tired they are of having to be the ones that teach their, you know, their white counterparts of what it means to be black, right? It's the same thing for those of us that are brown, right? So you know, it just comes with the turf. I'm sorry to tell you, yes, it is tiring. Yes, it's exhausting. You know, the way that I dealt with it is I went to therapy myself, right? So that I could continue to do it, because if not me, who, right? All of us have to play a role in continuing to visibilize our experiences and our communities. There's just no other way to do it. It starts with us. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up so Ima can jump in. When you look at the Dreamer movement, right? When did attitudes shift in the United States in favor of a path to legalization for dreamers. We still haven't achieved it for political reason because of who the elected officials are, but an overwhelming percentage of Americans support legalization for the dreamers. And that was not the case 20 or 30 years ago. It started when the dreamers started putting themselves out there. Say, this is who I am, and I'm undocumented. You know, I was brought here as a little kid by my parents. You know, and then America started to see that these were not, deadbeats. You know, that these were people who were valedictorians in their high schools. These were people that were going to college with great struggle. These are people that had tremendous contributions to our society, and we shifted it. Imagine if the dreamers had said, I'm so tired of just being the one who teaches you who a dreamer is, right? We've all done it, you know, in the 90s and 2000s, you know, the shift that we did in treatment of HIV. It was the same thing when people with HIV started coming out and saying who they were and how they contracted HIV, and they were just people like you and me, right? Yes, it was exhausting and difficult for them to put themselves on the firing line, but it changed perceptions. It changed the way that we viewed and treated people living with HIV and AIDS, right? So if not us, who? There are other ways, and I know Ima's going to talk about it. So, but if not us, who?
I want to confirm that the question is among colleagues, among clinicians like us, correct? I graduated from my master's program in 2011. The first year they offered, it was a mandatory class called diversity, and I didn't enjoy it. It was, we talked about different groups isolated from each other. So in that class, you learned about Jewish, Black community, LGBTQ, but there was not really an integration. And I think if I, and Luis, you are part of the educational system, I am not anymore, but if I could advocate, I would change the curriculum in social work and counseling and add one class should be decolonizing therapy for all clinicians that are choosing the clinical route as before they graduate from the master's program or a BA. Then I would, and that class should be mandatory, not one of the optional ones. I would add more of those classes on diversity, cultural humility, but those classes need to include also speakers that are working on the field, that are advocates for change, for the social movement. So bringing those speakers on campus, expanding the curriculums that all universities offer right now, and even the campus that I went to, and I didn't know that much about Catholic University. I moved to the US not that many years ago, so that was recommended by most of my peers, and when my campus was mainly white Americans. So I was one of the few Hispanics doing this master's program. So I will say changing the curriculum and adding more of those topics and classes that are relevant to the decolonizing theme and diversity, cultural humility.
I think those are some excellent recommendations and comments from both of you. Thank you. I have another question. It says here for Luis. What is your opinion on using faith communities and churches to help raise awareness about mental health issues?
Essential, absolutely essential. We actually work very closely with faith-based communities. I have all my career. I actually, in Houston, I had a grant from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. They have a mental health ministry. And I had a grant with one of the Hispanic churches in Houston to teach the clergy and the lay leaders about mental health in the Latino communities, recognizing signs and symptoms, talking about mental health, destigmatizing it, and connecting people to resources when possible. And I'm not even Lutheran, right? So I've worked with all faith-based communities to help message, to help the leaders, the spiritual leaders, the religious leaders, message to their communities. They are the the folks that the community is gonna listen to. We're working with them right now on COVID. You know, I'm part of a national initiative called SEAL, CEAL. If you just Google NIH SEAL initiative, CEAL, it's about community engaged approaches to get people to learn more about COVID, factual information, and to get vaccinated, to increase vaccine confidence, and to accept the vaccine. And we're using faith-based communities. You know, there's nothing more powerful than your religious leader or your pastor or your priest announcing, you know, in a sermon on Sunday morning, hey, this is really important. We all got to do this. I'm going to get the vaccine done right here in front of all of you. And after services, there's going to be a team from a clinic ABC in the hall next door to vaccinate any volunteers who want to get the vaccine. So, you know, the same thing with mental health. So it is essential. We can't do it without our faith-based leaders and our faith-based communities.
Thank you, Luis. I have several more questions. There's one here. Please explain what drives the inequities in education. What makes it unfair?
I'll send you the slides, because, you know, we talked about all of the economic disincentives that Latino students have to struggle with, right? So, you know, that you're more likely to be the first person in college. So already you have no frame of reference or no organic support system to help you through it. You're more likely to come from a low income family. You're more likely to have to get into debt. You know, you're more likely to have to work while you're in school, to be part-time, all of those factors. And you know, that means that it's harder. You know, it's harder, right? So you all probably remember that famous line in the movie Selena, where the dad is in the minivan with Selena and the brother, and he's going like, you know, being a Mexican American is hard, right? And he goes into that monologue. We should do a new one saying, you know, being a Latino in college is hard. And you know, I'm gonna email right to that young lady that did the video that you shared in Me Too, and do one like that. You know, why is it hard to be you know, your friends may want to go party and you got to leave class and go to work, right? I mean, that was the case with me when I was an undergraduate student. Can't tell you how many times, you know, my classmates, you know, Thursdays, I had a class that ended at 6 o'clock, and sometimes they wanted to go out and have a drink, and I had to leave and go to work, right? So there are many, many factors, but the truth is that the experience of Latinos in college is different than the experience of our non-Latino, particularly white, more privileged peers. And I don't behoove them their privilege. You know, I'm glad they have it. What I'm trying to say is that our experience shouldn't be that different. How much money you make shouldn't dictate the quality of your experience in life or in higher ed.
I agree with you, Luis. Thank you for that. I would like to direct participants to their handout that is in their menu. You can access through the handout section, and there you can find both Iman's presentation and Dr. Luis Torres' presentation. We still have a few minutes, and there's quite a few questions, so we'll make the most of it. There's one here that could seem simplistic, but I think it's very important. It says, is mental health hereditary?
Say that again.
Is mental health hereditary?
Hereditary. Some disorders are. There is a predisposition for anxiety and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. Some personality traits can also be passed through the DNA. So yeah, some of them are hereditary, others are environmental. I will say that I think some of them are both. They can be hereditary, and then the environment may increase the likelihood that someone will actually develop it.
Yeah, it's nature and nurture, right? Not everybody who struggles with depression, for example, their kids are all going to struggle with depression. And not everybody who has depression, their parents struggled with depression, right? So there are genetic predispositions. Irma was talking about this diathesis stress model. Some people have a genetic predisposition, and environmental factors just trigger it. It's both, which is why early identification and early intervention is really, really important. And then addressing all of these environmental stressors, social determinants of health that we were talking about.
Thank you, both of you, for that answer. We have time for one more question. I have here a lengthy and an interesting one. And it says, I am a student in a PsyD program at PWI in VA. I currently have clients that are immigrants that I oftentimes feel useless because I am not sure how to help them because I am not familiar with the laws, even though I have tried. And I won't be here for much longer as I move towards internship. So I'm just trying to connect with them. I'm trying to connect them with the right people, but I'm not sure who those people are. Even the social workers at my site don't know what services they are eligible for, even though they have valid social security cards to work here for them and their children. Then I am often asked about ways to work the system in ways that may help them get what they need, but that may risk all they have worked hard to achieve legally, and I don't know how to answer. Any advice?
I will say in Washington, D.C., I work with the law school and their program. Some of they actually, it's a requirement for students. They offer pro bono services as part of their training. So in fact, I partner with them. I do pro bono psychological evaluations for immigration proceedings. And I then send also clients to them for cases like this. Like I don't provide legal advice. So anything that is related to those nuances, immigration law, family law, deportation. So that's what we're doing in Washington. They have a big clinic and they do pro bono work. So I wonder if in your area you could also inquire about those free services. And then we have a few community agencies as well that offer sliding scale legal services, one that specializes in topics of immigration, and then another one that does a little bit of everything. And based on income, they offer legal advice.
Yeah. The American Bar Association is always a great place to start because they have programs in different parts of the country. They have one here in South Texas. It's called Pro Bar, South Texas Pro Bono Asylum Representation Project. And they provide no cost representation for some of the folks that are coming over the border, seeking a refugee or asylum status. The University of Houston had an immigration law clinic that worked with folks first to find out if they have a feasible pathway to regularize their legal status, and then to provide other services. So we have to practice in our scope. You're a mental health practitioner, and that's where you should be focusing your efforts with your clients, and just increasing your research network with the knowledge that our clients, our patients, have many complications in their lives, and for some of them it's legal issues, right? So start creating a referral network of organizations and individuals that provide legal services. They're available in every state. I mean, I couldn't tell you, I don't know where you are, so I couldn't tell you where you're located, but I would start with the American Bar Association.
Thank you. We are nearing the time of our time together, nearing the end of the time together. It's already 3 o'clock, and we still have questions, but we don't have time for any more of those. We thank all of our attendees for being with us today and commenting and being such a great audience. Also, thanks to our presenters, Ima and Dr. Torres. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We would like to refer our participants to let us know what they think of this presentation through the QR code, which you can scan on your screen, or the link that is also provided in the chat. This is what helps us to continue to provide training and technical assistance free of charge throughout the United States and its territories. So we would like to thank you once again for being here. Also, our colleagues from Imperial Valley College, and we'll bid you a good day. Thank you. Have a great day.
Gracias. Thank you. Angel, how do I end the? I don't use